491 push-to-talks, which is basically a radio transmit from one of our emergency responders, and that's over our radio system. Normally during that time we'd have more like 5,403, so almost triple the activity, triple the activity. And you know, just I was there that night with the leadership staff and a number of our staff that came in that evening to help us through that event, and I'm just extremely proud that everybody you know, was able to work through all the calls that were coming into the center, manage all the information that was coming in, and relay that information back out to those folks that are emergency responders, you know, out there on the scene doing the work that emergency responders do. So it was really a good effort, a good partnership between Metro Communications and city and county emergency responders. So.
Did you guys staff up that evening in preparation for that?
We did. Yeah, we had planned for the event. You know, we had made some preparations ahead of time. We were able to have some staff members come in on overtime, and it worked well. Our plan went accordingly, and that's always a good thing when everything goes as planned. So.
Well, I appreciate all your help that night. That was a tough night. A lot of times the guard, the PD, they get a lot of props for the work they did, and justifiably so, but you guys were a big part of that effort, and I think the community was very appreciative for how everyone handled you know, that event on the 31st. So
sure,
please share my thanks with your staff too.
I will. Those are definitely not easy events to work through, and as a matter of fact, he's not here right at the moment, but Matt Tooley had his 21st anniversary on that date with Metro Communications. And he said to me afterwards, he said, that was one of the toughest days I've had in my 21-year career because of just the emotion, the amount of stress, the amount of compassion for those people that are out there working the emergencies and responding to the events. You know, we worry about their safety, and we take that very seriously. So he said to me, oh, there he is today. Matt Tooley said that was one of the most difficult days of his career. So. And hopefully he doesn't mind me sharing that information. January through August statistics for Metro Communications Agency. Coordinator Justin Faber, I want to give him credit where credit is due. And Justin is one that puts all these charts and graphs together for us. And I would just like him to step up to the podium and walk us through that information.
Is that TV work still, is that on right now in the cabinets still?
It's supposed to be.
Can the TV open? The cabinet's not open?
Oh, the cabinet itself is. Is it on?
Monty, do you know how to turn this on?
Is it Sharp TV? Or an LG? LG.
It's all right if that's pain. We'll.
Yeah, I see it turning on.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Justin Faber, Quality Assurance Coordinator for Metro. I have a reputation for getting a little long-winded when it comes to numbers, so I'll do my best. So we track a handful of metrics at Metro that kind of paint a pretty broad picture of what our work volume is at in the center and what the impact of COVID has been over the last 5 or 6 months. And so the top of the first page that we're looking at is actually what we call calls for service. I'm sorry, no, this is the phone calls. We'll start with phone calls. We'll go the other direction. Okay. So this is 911 and non-emergency phone calls into the center. The next page we'll look at actually has calls for service. They are two separate things. So we have actual somebody calling a number and answered by a dispatcher, and then a call for service is actually a CAD-created item where some form of public safety has to actually respond to an address. So not every call for service is the result of a phone call, because we deal with a fair amount of officer-initiated activity, and not every phone call results in a call for service, because there are times where we can just transfer the call to somebody else or answer a question, and that's the end of a phone call. So phone calls for us over the last 5 or 6 months have seen about a 2% decrease through COVID. We usually see about a 3% increase in calls each year. So in terms of where we are to where we are expected to be, we're probably about 5% lower than where we would want to be. Below that is actually the call volume of each of the individual dispatch boards. We like to track how busy each board that we have is. So the first two, PD East and PD West, are our police dispatchers. We like to consider these people primary radio dispatchers. So we don't want to see their call volume be very high. We want a lot of what they're doing to be outgoing. And law enforcement sees about 60% of the phone calls that they take at their boards be outgoing phone calls. The spike that you see in those two is actually a little misleading. So as we've gone through COVID at our agency, one of the responses has been trying to social distance out the councils that we actually staff. So as staffing allows where we can move people around, we've moved our police dispatchers to other councils to try to get additional space between dispatchers. And so the people who have then backfilled those police councils have been call takers. And so at times, people sitting those councils have taken a bunch more calls, but they haven't actually been police dispatchers that are taking them. So that piece of the graph can be a little misleading. The two that I really want to focus on today, though, are the Sheriff's Board, which is MCSO up there, and then Fire Board. Those are the two that have really been the target for us over the last probably 3 years. The call volume at those boards has continued to rise as our call volume as an agency has continued to rise, and those boards on the radio have gotten busier and busier and busier every year. And so at some point in time, we needed to make a change. They were taking too many phone calls while trying to juggle all of the radio that they have to handle as well. So we came to you guys last year asking for additional staff as call takers, with the specific purpose of putting those call takers during our busier hours to try to impact SO and Fire Board call volume. And now you can see that this is actually a direct reflection of our increase in minimums in 2020. As we've increased minimums and put those call takers out onto the floor, we have seen a sharp decline in Fire Board and SO actual call volume on the phone. So that's been a huge positive for us, even as call volume has started to actually rise again for June and July, and I'll talk about that here in a second when we get to the next slide. But even as the volume has continued to go up, now that we're kind of coming out of the bottom out of the COVID, the call volume at those boards is continuing to go down. So that's a huge positive for us. And then the last one at the very bottom is all of our call taker positions put together. And that is obviously showing a huge spike up, which is exactly what we want. We want our call takers to be the ones that are answering the calls, and our dispatchers to actually focus on radio traffic and dispatching out the calls. All right, and then the next one we're going to talk about, if you can scroll down to the next one, is calls for service. So these are actual calls in which a public safety response is sent, either police, fire, or EMS. And so when you look at the two numbers that are there, it's always going to be a 6-month look back. So where are we at now compared to where we were at 6 months ago? And so when you look at where we're at now, 260,600 to where we were at 6 months ago, just under 262,000, we're down. And we actually were down even more than that when you look at when we bottomed out in late April, early May. For January and February, where it gets really interesting is at the beginning of 2020, before COVID hit, January and February of 2020 compared to January and February of 2019 had a 9.5% increase in calls for service. So we were actually at the very beginning of the year on a record pace for increase in a single year. And then we had COVID hit in March. March, April, and May saw a 6% decrease in total calls when compared to March, April, and May of last year. Calls for service growth year to year is actually very similar to what our actual phone call growth is. We expect about a 3% growth each year. So to see a 3-month span where we're 6% below where we were the previous year, it means we're actually closer to probably a 10% drop from where we would expect to be. So it was a pretty significant reduction in total calls for service. Certainly the makeup of those calls for service was different than normal for us. We saw a lot of public setting type of events go down during the height of the city locking everything down. Traffic incidents, accidents, injury accidents that we took in the 911 center went down. In-home emergencies, domestic type of things went up. And so even though the call for service volume and maybe even the overall call volume for the agency went down, the workload that we have because those in-home medicals, in-home domestic type of calls take longer to process. They're kind of more of a heavier burden. The actual workload in the center didn't actually see too much of a drop. We like to look at discipline-wise the 3 disciplines and how they're growing or not growing through the epidemic, and that's police, fire, and EMS. Police saw a little bit of a drop at the very beginning, March, April, May. Again, we talked about how the makeup of some of those calls, traffic incidents down, in-home, violent crimes up. Fire actually throughout the entire event saw a slow and steady increase in calls, as did EMS. Our EMS system here, when compared to EMS systems around the country, was kind of the outlier. A lot of systems saw decreases in total calls, and we never saw it. Our EMS volume continued to climb throughout the entire event, so that was really interesting, and I'm not really sure what to attribute that to for Sioux Falls. The far right-hand side, the 3 columns there, is actually radio push-to-talks. So how many times did a responder come up on the radio and talk to Metro Communications? So as the call volume for police went down, we did see a little bit of a dip in the total push-to-talks for police channels as well. Now starting to go back up as the call for service volume for June and July has continued to increase. And actually, I think I might have forgotten to say it, but June and July of 2020 is now up 3.2% from June and July of 19. So we're kind of back to where I expected us to be for June and July of 2020. Fires push-to-talks, which is the next one down, are actually slightly down, even though their call volume has gone up. What I would attribute that mostly to is that as Fire's kind of game plan has changed through COVID, they've done a little bit less of the units being out of station, whether it's to go to PR events and stuff like that, and more of the firefighters have stayed in station. And every time that a fire truck or apparatus goes out of station to do anything, they always notify Metro, because we like to know where our resources are at, and just in case we need to start a secondary station to a call. And so as those events have gone down, the overall volume of traffic on that fire channel has gone down. And then fire and EMS piece has shown a slow and steady increase as well through the entire event, as EMS volume hasn't really changed at all. So that's a pretty, hopefully, relatively quick overview, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
All right, thanks, Justin.
Justin, I would like to set up a time to meet with you, and a lot of data here, and I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I'm understanding it properly.
For sure.
So, yeah, can you send me an email? Let me know your availability so I can
Absolutely.
maybe take 30 minutes of your time. I don't
Yeah,
want to do
it's
that
it's a
here.
lot of information. It's really difficult to try to summarize in 10 minutes, so
And
for
data is
sure.
important, but you have to understand the data.
Yep.
So, and I really feel I need to comprehend this a little bit
Deal,
better.
absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Justin?
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 5. And apparently there's a facility we need to talk about.
Yes. Just before we do that, I also want to thank Information Technology Coordinator Matt Tooley, because he also has a hand in gathering all this information and the data that we use. I know I've said it in the past, and I'll probably say it in the future, that we are a data-driven organization. We look at our past to help us determine the future, and it's very important for us to just monitor that data and put it to good use. So that's what we're trying to do with all that, and I appreciate you, Commissioner, wanting to take a deeper look at that. Thank you. Okay, facilities discussion. Since April, there's been numerous meetings with city and county officials, and just in the last couple weeks, we've had several meetings. We continue to look at the partnership opportunity that we have with the Public Safety Training Campus, housing both the fire and training facilities out there. We have identified that as the best course of action for the future of Metro as far as facilities goes. And we're doing everything possible to make sure that we keep the cost down. We're working with our vendors. And like I said, we're working with the city and county officials to do our best to make that project happen. And we just appreciate being invited to the table and being a partner in that facility. So if there's any questions I can answer, I'll certainly try and do that today. But I just wanted to give just a short update on the progress that has been made since April.
Well, maybe to kind of kick off the discussion, give me an overview, kind of for all of us, on where we sit today, because obviously the facility was presented. There was discussions on the cost. There was discussions on the size. The commission has had discussions on that. The Sioux Falls City Council's had discussions on that. Since that time, I know there's been conversations and meetings that have happened with individual commissioners, individual counselors. We're talking about costs. We're talking with our equipment vendors. We're We're talking about the FF&E and carving that out and maybe having the county tackle that piece and trying to get to yes on what a good arrangement would look like to bear the cost of the project. So as we sit today, maybe unpack that for us. And what's the financial number we're looking at for the project? And what's the latest discussion we've had between city council members and commission members on the cost it would mean to each entity?
Sure. I do have to not get specific on some of the quote information because it's confidential and proprietary until you sign the agreement. So I'll avoid getting real specific on numbers pertaining to any certain vendor. But I can say that, at least when I first became involved with this project, at that time we were still looking at our current site, and we were looking at, what would it cost to build a new site, or what would it cost to be a component of this public safety campus. And, the number floated around between, $9 and $11 million. And then it was $8 million for a while, and then, we floated around different numbers, but today, that number is actually just below $10 million, all in and done. The city's contribution, thank you, Mayor, for the offer to construct a facility, to erect the tower, to install the UPS system. All said and done, I think that was just over $7.58 million, I believe is the number.
Is that correct? Is that correct, Sean? Where
7.85, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, 7.85 million on the city side, and then of course, there's a large amount of in kind, such as the land, the parking lots, some of the design work, all those things that we can look at as in kind towards making this happen. So on the city side, then we started looking at the focus of, on the county side, we started looking at the focus of furniture, fixtures, and equipment. That number has ranged from 2.7 million down to 2.475 million, down to where it is today, which is just over $2 million, $2,066,000 without any kind of a contingency built into that. So those are still discussions we're having, as far as what that contingency should be. But in a rough estimate of where we are at today, it'd be this $7,850,000 and the $2,066,000. So.
How did it get down to just north of 2 million? Tell me how that happened.
Being very persistent with our vendors, particularly one vendor that we made contact with, we had some pretty substantial savings, more than what I expected to receive, and so that was one of the main drivers. And then of course, like I said, just going through the various items within the FF&E and trying to identify, if there was any other areas that we could trim. And certainly, like I said, the city support and some of those in-kind things certainly brought the price down as well. So
one more question. I know these guys will have questions as well, and maybe Councilor Erickson on the phone. So the savings, any savings that we've seen on FF&E or with any equipment, that's all been county savings. So it hasn't been, the city's number stayed the same. Any savings we're starting to realize is just going towards county country, because we're really close to 80-20
yes,
in the cost share
yes,
at this point.
Yeah, actually 79-21, 80-20, it's
Okay.
right in that area.
Okay. Well, I know I've had conversations with both the commissioners. I know they probably have some questions and comments on the project, so maybe I'll just turn it over to you guys or to Councilor Kiley, Councilor Erickson. Any thoughts on the project? I think what we need to do, just I think logistically, is at some point when we get to yes, we're going to have to call a special meeting to actually, we don't have to formally vote to approve, but we have to kind of vote to have a recommendation to the council and to the commission, who will ultimately vote on the funding expenditure. So I don't anticipate us doing that today, of course, but I think you probably have to look for a special meeting request coming up in the next couple weeks on that. So discussion on the facilities.
You want me to
I
start?
have a couple questions if I can.
Go ahead, Councilor Erickson.
I just want to, I'm kind of leaning in and trying to make sure I can hear everything. And just based off of what you said, Mr. Mayor Scott, what my question is talk to me again about what the split is between the city and the county. What is our goal? Is it 80-20? Is it 75-25? What, remind me what that is.
The current Metro Management Agreement does call for 75-25 split on our operations, our day-to-day operations. You know, how we apply that to this scenario is something that I would ask for the city and county to give me some direction on where you want to be with that percentage. But what I will say is we are extremely grateful for this project and very much appreciative of all the efforts of the city and county to make this happen.
Thank you for that clarification. And I certainly am not, I'm certainly not here to split hairs or anything. And I'm 100% in support of this project because we can't keep kicking it down the road for $500,000 of uneasiness between two entities that we manage. But I certainly want to recognize, which I know, Scott, you have mentioned, that there are a lot of in-kind things and a lot of benefits by attaching this facility to another facility. And there's also things that, you know, we wouldn't put into this particular facility that you're getting, which is a huge benefit for employee retention, employee training, and really just the morale of making sure that we've got the best darn Metro management in this region and truly in the state, in my opinion. And like I said, I'm not here to split hairs, but I will support it. But I just think it's a little interesting that, you know, all the cost savings go one direction and aren't equally split. But I'm certainly not going to fall on my sword for that, and certainly want to see this project go forward because it's the right thing to do.
All right, thanks, Counselor. Commissioner Benninga, you want to
Sure.
share some thoughts from the commission
Well,
side?
we started this process, excuse me, losing my voice today. But anyway, and I'll go back to the December minutes that we discussed this at Metro Management. We used the rough estimate of $8 million in our budget process preliminarily, and frankly, we were at 25% at that point, thinking that we were going to spend $2 million, and that's the number that we used throughout our budget process until, frankly, about maybe 2 weeks ago when we heard that our number could be as much as 2.8 or whatever, which was something we didn't budget for, and frankly, we didn't fill positions that were requested in our provisional budget that we adopted that morning before we heard that $2.8 million number. The other thing that we didn't know was the size of the building, which that's you guys' issue that you're dealing with, and we appreciate that. The other thing that we just found out, literally within the last few days, in fact, Tuesday, is the money that we were going to use to support that $2 million investment in this building, which we totally support the building. That is not the concern at all. But the $2 million that we were going to use was going to come out of the building fund, and then we were told that we cannot use that money out of the building fund to purchase furniture and fixtures. That was, I think, the legal opinion that we got. I don't know, Drew, if that was part of your discussion or someone else's, I think, but
Need different lawyers, sounds like.
well, he's a good lawyer, so we trust his opinion. The other thing is that, frankly, we'll move forward with that $2 million, whether it's 20 or 25% of the total project, but that's kind of our limit for what we can do at this point because, frankly, we're going to have to go back through our budget and find the $2 million out of the general fund that we thought we were going to be able to use building money for. I'm not making excuses. That's just the way we have been advised, and we have a responsibility to balance that budget. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm not, and I even have the motion that Mr. Tanakin made that we wanted to do a pro forma on the funding plan way back in December, and I seconded that, and I'm glad that we did it. But right now, we used the $2 million funding to be able to come up with a budget number that, frankly, made it all the way through to the provisional on, I think it was July 28th that we approved the budget, and then you guys had a combined meeting, I think, later that evening, which I couldn't attend because I had a Active Generations Board meeting that evening at the same time. And I've heard different versions of comments that came out of that conversation, and frankly, I didn't read any of the media, so I sleep better when I don't.
Councilor or Commissioner Karski?
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. I think it's important to note that the traditional 75-25 split is going to be maintained on the operation of Metro Communications. And in fact, looking down the road, that those numbers continue to grow, especially with the growth. And I'm just going to echo what Commissioner Benninga said, that we're paying ours out of cash. We're not bonding. We budgeted, and we know how much cash we have. The well is only so deep, so we can only go so deep into there to get that money. But the other thing is that 75-25 split, I mean, that's going way back to when Metro was started, and the city was smaller, the county was smaller, but it was based on call volume coming in from the city and call volume coming in from the county. And I know there's been some talk about, should that be relooked at? And I mean, if we do, it's a can of worms. It could go either way for either one of us. And, that operational split, I'm comfortable with the operational budget at 75-25 right now. So I don't know if we want to go down that road of, well, it should be this on this also. We're coming up with what we can for cash, and it's $2 million little plus, and that's in our budget. And for us to come up with more, we don't have it.
So, great points. Thank you. What about, because I've been thinking about other cities. So you guys answer for Brandon, for instance,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But Brandon obviously isn't contributing to the
Yes.
project.
Well, not to the facility, but to our annual budget, they do, to the tune of about 80,000, 82,000.
Operating.
Right.
But not
right.
to this
Not
project, of
for
which.
this project, no.
So is that a conversation we've ever talked about having with these other cities that are also going to be benefiting from this, or is this supposed to be a Sioux Falls lift? And because these are hard questions we're having to ask. If this is a situation we're in, and how would that go?
Sure.
In your opinion?
Let me think about my response quickly, but this is part of our goal. This is part of our vision of who we want Metro to be in the future. We want to be a partner with other communities besides the city of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County, and if we can branch out into other business partners, whether that's other counties or the state or whomever those partners might be in the future, they'll help alleviate some of this load that we're experiencing. As Commissioner Karski says, is our budget will grow in the future. Each and every time that we ask for additional staff, that budget grows, and we have to be prepared to that. We have to plan today for years ahead of us, and we're doing a little bit of catch up at the moment because years ago, maybe back as far as 2010 or so, there was a decision made that we would spend our cash down. There was a pretty healthy amount of cash that was being saved for a phone system. Well, the state came in and purchased the phone system, so then we started spending that money down, and in addition to that, we only hired 3 staff between 2010, I believe it was, and 2018. And so now we kind of have to go back and do a little bit of catch up on some of those areas that we didn't keep up with over the years. And facilities is another example. I mean, our facility is 40 years old, and we're trying to make improvements. And, it takes support to do that. And I appreciate your comments, Mayor, that we do have to reach out to look at other sources to help us through this. The city of Brandon, they are paying a police dispatch service. It's not for 911 because they're covered under the county for 911, but they're paying a police dispatch service. And, we can certainly approach them to see if they could help in any shape or form, but those are all discussions we have to look at having. They're difficult discussions. Nobody wants an increase in their invoice, but there's certainly things we can look at doing in the future, and I think that does fit our vision. It does fit our plan.
And what about What about the fact that when this facility is built, we'll still be utilizing the current space as a backup? And, you know, the city will still be paying a lease on that, right? We'll be funding 75% of the lease of that space from the county. So is there anything creative we can do with the lease on that? You see where I'm going with this, to cover some of the shortfall and make it up over a longer term? And is that an option that we could put on the table?
I think what you mean is to bring this closer back to our 75-25% agreement.
Right, so I don't know what we pay, what that lease would be, but if it's less of a 75-25 lease and more of a 25-25 lease, and the other 50% is, I'm just throwing out fake numbers, but you see where I'm going, and we see how long that would take to true up any difference, or, I don't know, I'm looking at Sean, I don't know if there's any, if that's possible, or if that would be an option that would be worthy of consideration, but maybe you want to come up and speak to that, maybe, if that's something we could look at?
It's one area that we can look at. I know that Metro, excuse me, I don't know if you can hear me. Metro does lease space from the county. The need for that space, you and I have had some conversations here over the last day. The need for the amount of space that's at the county will probably shrink, just based on the fact that you don't need the office's space and some of the supplemental things that you would need in a backup center, which is primarily your dispatch and your server rooms and your core infrastructure that you need to operate a backup center. Metro leases that from the county currently. So it will shrink space. It's based on size allotment is part of that, what that lease requirement is. But one way to manage the proration between the city and the county might be through looking at some adjustments to that lease amount that would not be significant over an individual year, but would bring us back in parity over the length of the utilization of the new PSAP. So it's one thing that we've had a discussion about, especially in light, we've really been targeting trying to manage that number down for the county, but we're getting a little bit out of proportion for where we've been in an operational perspective. It's been a good partnership for us, but we are trying to manage being consistent with our contributions as well.
Okay. Yeah, Councilor Kiley?
Well, we're having this discussion basically for the public safety, for purposes of public safety throughout this community. And this past September really illustrated why we need to have this discussion and stop kicking the can down the road and act, because we filled not only our primary dispatch center, but also our backup. They were operating full tilt. And if any of those three tornadoes had impacted either one of the facilities, which, by the way, neither are up to the standards that a PSAP should be at, we would have been in a world of hurt. And so that's why we're having these discussions today, so that we can make sure that we're protecting the public. And it is, obviously, there's benefits to the staff of Metro. It would help with the retention and attracting new employees, and it would be it would provide an environment that's more conducive for them to perform a stressful job, which relates when you have happy employees. Generally, they're going to pass that along to their clients, in this case, the public, who are in dire need of help when they dial 911. So it all goes back to public safety. I guess, one of the questions I have about the $8 million that the $2 million for the county budget was drawn off of, to my knowledge, that budget wasn't based off of any schematic drawings that were produced by an engineering firm or architect. That was just numbers that we as a group had kicked around. And so I kind of feel that the city is unfairly being treated, that, well, gee, now it's far exceeded that, but none of us on this council here are architects and engineers. So we could not see what those numbers were going to come in at until we actually had the schematics completed. And that, because the public safety training facility was well along in the process already with the schematics and the drawings being done, we kind of piggytailed back onto that, and which then took even a little bit more time and delayed those numbers coming back. So I guess if either of you would like to address that point, that $8 million was not, that was just kind of an estimate that came out of this group.
Commissioner Karski?
I guess I could talk to that maybe a little bit. Just coming off of building a new house, my wife and I had a budget to build a house, and we said this is what the house has to fit into. If we have an $8 million budget, we got to make the project fit into the budget, not the budget fit into the project. I think we're putting the cart before the horse. If it's not going to fit, we got to start making cuts. We face that all the time, especially on the county level. So we're working on a highway facility. We're trying to make it work. We have to work within the budget that we set for ourselves. So that's the approach I'm going to take and just use to justify the $8 million and our $2 million. Now we talk about the lease rate for Metro Communications here. I'm imagining that Metro is going to be leasing the new space from the city. Has that been discussed and what that rate's going to be? And is it going to be on par with what this building is? Have we had that conversation?
Has been some of those discussions. I'd defer to the finance
Okay.
department on that.
The lease would come forward prior to the completion of the facility, but the intention is that we're both contributing, whether we're buying equipment or we're actually paying for the building, we're both contributing toward the construction of the building. So the lease would cover, in many respects, some of your utilities and maintenance costs, the ongoing operational side, portions of the property insurance, things like that, but nominal in nature relative to the actual cost of the structure, since we're both coming forward, you know, hopefully in proportional basis to construct the building. So that's the thought process behind the lease.
I mean, the city's going to own it and then be paying, be paying themselves rent, basically, but through Metro Communications, you're just moving the money from here to here is all that is happening. But the county gets to pay rent that we don't own on a building, and just like you're doing over here for us. So, I mean, like I said, if we're going to look at lease rates, we probably got to look at everything as a whole and make sure that we don't have, there's no reason why we shouldn't be looking at them identically. So.
When what we pay for lease for the current location was the backup taken into consideration at that time and subtracted from the lease that we pay the county, or have the city, just been providing that backup space free of charge?
Yes, the city has been providing the space located at station headquarters at no charge. The only lease space that we have is at our current site with the county. There are some tower sites that we lease, but as far as facilities, the only lease that we have is with the county for that 4,296 square foot.
And Commissioner Karski, I can greatly appreciate your comments about establishing a budget and then staying within. However, as I pointed out earlier, we do have a responsibility to the public to provide the services that they need and expect to have. You know, currently 2/3 of the floor space is going to be occupied day one. And with the growth of the city in this county, that third, it's not going to be long. Some of you may still be serving the county. I won't be as a counselor, but it's not going to be long, and that's going to be filled. And if we wish to realize our goal of servicing other counties and becoming a regional PSAP, potentially taking on calls for the South Dakota Highway Patrol, and I do believe that there's great opportunity there to bring in additional revenue that helps all of us in this. But if we cut off that third of the floor space now and just went with our immediate needs, we're going to pay far more in the future to try to expand. Plus, it would cut out any chance of additional revenue by developing additional partnerships. So we need to be looking down the road as far as what we can do and what we can become.
And that holds true on the FF and E side as well, that, you know, if you reduce what you need today, but you need it a year or two down the road, you will pay much more for it a year or two down the road than what you'd pay for it today. Here's just an example I found. I did as much research as I could, looking at old emails, looking through building folders of information pertaining to the building, and I found an estimate or a quote from our current architect, WSKF, but it was just for at that time was March of 2019, and the amount was for just under 9.5 million. So I looked at that, and then I looked at the current amount that we're at 9.9 million. And really, the only difference I could find between the two was the amount that we just recently received from one of our vendors, reducing that cost. So really, when I looked at it, I'm like, we're exactly where we were a year ago as far as the price of this facility. So I think that's pretty good homework that somebody did just prior to my arrival last year that said, this is the number, and it was $9.5 million. So, you know, that's why I said we've kind of moved around on numbers from 10 to 11 million down to 8 million back to 9 to 11 million. So I appreciate Commissioner Benniga's comments that you have to budget. You have to put a number in that budget for a future year. But I'm not sure where the 2 million came from when I look at all the history of it. And like I say, going back to March of last year, that number was more than 8 million at that point.
Well, I know at our recent joint meeting, joint city and county meeting, it was stated that there's a savings of approximately 2.4 million doing it this way, piggybacking off of the public safety building versus doing a standalone. And part of that comes from the fact that there's no land costs whatsoever, or costs of parking lot and the other requirements that you would have to have for surrounding property. No soft costs, no architectural engineering, financing, the roadways and infrastructure to the facility, no costs being assessed to the county in that regard too. So I just want to make it known that the city is doing all we possibly can to make this palpable for the county and for all. And we've had a great relationship, and I expect that we're going to continue to have a great relationship. And I do understand also where you guys are coming from too. Just so that, again, I just wanted to be understood that we are doing what we can, including the areas that will not be charged towards this project. The fitness areas, the OC and the media rooms, the shared large bathrooms and various training rooms. None of those are going to be charged against this project either. So, but yet available to our PSAP personnel.
Right. If I could comment quickly on that, Councilor Kiley, that is one of the ways that we managed to reduce the cost of this overall project is because Justin and I worked on many floor plans, and those floor plans ranged in space from 15,800 up to 20,000 square foot. But because of the fact that we didn't have to account for that fitness area, we didn't have to account for some of the break room areas, some of the hallway space, all those things that were included, we were able to reduce this project down to 16,800 square feet and reduce the overall cost of the PSAP portion of it. So, I think I've seen great relationship between the city and county in the time that I've been here. I've seen great partnership, and I'm just looking forward to continuing to have that partnership and really working toward getting this project done. And I just appreciate all your efforts, and I certainly understand from both sides how your budgets need to come together for your needs and for the public's needs. So
So if I can recap, then we're at a 79-21% split on the project right now. Okay, if we want to keep it equitable, we're 4% apart on the thing. From what I'm hearing from the county, there's not another nickel that can be found in your budget to move that. Am I correct? I'm going to go on record and say that you don't have a nickel more than the 2.066.
One of the nice things about the county's budget is we're tied to property taxes, which gives us a very reliable source of income. While it's very reliable, we can project out quite well in 2-3 years what we're going to get. And yeah, I think we can all say very firmly that this is our budget.
Okay. And you said it's
real quick.
2,066,000. Is that correct?
Let me look at the
Okay.
sheet. $2,066,430.
Okay.
And we're talking payment would be due in 2022.
January.
Yes, we worked with the auditor on some of these items, and of course, we'll have to work with the vendors to make sure that they'll accept payment then. But I can tell you with one particular vendor, the largest vendor, as long as we assign an agreement today, we don't have to make payment until closer to delivery dates. So our vendors are working with us the best they can as well to try and make this project happen.
At a guaranteed price, Scott?
Yes,
Okay.
yep, we can lock
Good.
in, as long as we do it before December 4th of this year, there's a substantial savings on one particular vendor.
Good news.
So it would be an absolute shame for this project when we're on the 1 yard line to fall apart over $400,000. Okay? So we have to figure out, this group, how to get to yes and get this done over this, I'll call it 400K chasm. So I think what we're going to be tasked with is figuring out whether it's that creativity in leasing, if that exists, something that we can do outside of the lump sum upfront 2 point whatever to try and create equity, because it opens up the larger discussion of the 75-25% split. And you know, even this board is 60-40. It's 60 city, it's 40 council. So even the board isn't an equitable representation of the monetary, and so this is unearthing some real issues we got to just have a conversation about. And I don't. When I sat here, my first meeting, Paul Niedringhouse presented on the facility, Jeff Barth over there saying, we have talked about this thing for we can almost say decades now. And so I heard that and said, all right, I'm going to use political capital that I'm going to burn to try and get this thing done, because we got to get this done. And our city isn't shrinking, our county isn't shrinking. Your facility seems to be shrinking every time I go in there. And so we're so dang close on this that there's a solution. We'll get to yes on this, I know we will. And even if the city has to cover this, we're not going to let it fall apart over this. So I want to give you guys the assurance the project's going to get done. But we just have to, as leaders, figure out outside of the dais, what can we do creatively to make this feel equitable on both sides. So I think there's a way to get there. There's other probably stones we haven't unturned. My fear is if you cut 400K off this budget, that's 400K, which is 25%. So we match 75%. We just cut, $1.6 million out of this project, and the only thing to really cut is space, because taking a little aback when we talked about gold plating, like Jeff Barth said, and it's like there's not gold plating. It's basically space. So what we would be doing, in my opinion, is basically handcuffing ourselves a little bit for long-term growth would be any cost reduction. And I'm hesitant to do that because I want to do it. I don't want to ever have to talk about a PSAP again in this city for the next couple decades. So I think it's up to us to do it now, do it right, and do it once, and be done. So that's just the gospel according to Paul. I think we're close. I think we'll figure it out. And we can probably have some more conversations with our finance team, with Carol, who's been leading on your side, to see how we can further bridge this gap. And if we can't, I think that unearths some more challenging conversations that I really don't want to have, to be honest with you. I want to see if we can figure this out. So.
Well, we asked everybody that presented in our budget process about how they've done business differently when we have had to face this coronavirus hassle, because I know as an organization we're doing things a whole lot different than we could before. How are you going to do things differently from this day forward in your operation as an essential operation, there's no question. We will find a way to make this work. But to not pay any attention to, frankly, those changes that everybody else in the world has had to face, I think we need to talk about that too. Or you need to think about that. Are you going to have some people that are going to be able to work from home in the future?
I can answer the last part of that question quickly. And the work from home environment, it's called Cloud 911 is what the terminology is for that today, to work from home. We've looked at that already. I've followed some articles on it, what's going on nationwide. There's about 6% of the PSAPs that are doing cloud-based 911, and the reason why, very expensive. It's just super expensive. We looked into buying, it's essentially a laptop with our software on it so that we can establish radio communications, and it was $6 figures plus to do that. We've looked into the phone side with the state so that we'd have a failure option if we needed to leave our current center today, and let's just say there was something wrong at our backup center as well. So we looked at, again, a laptop with software on it. Over the course of 3 years, we're talking a lot of money for that, and it's just not affordable right at the moment. I think technology, Commissioner, is a little ahead of the finances that we are all able to provide, so I think that's the issue right now with that. But certainly from the COVID response side, we've done a lot at our facility to try and prevent COVID from ever entering, and for certain, any symptom signs that any of the staff had, we responded immediately, gave them some time to spend at home and whatever the case was. But, this is part of it too, is having that social distancing between our councils. Today, we don't have that space to social distance. In the new facility, looking at the designs that we put together, there would be that 6 to 7 foot of space between one operator and another, depending on which design layout we go with. But that's a part of it. And already these council companies are selling glass partitions to go between the councils and around the councils to basically create a barrier around that operator. So there's lots of things we can do to look towards that in the future, but yeah, some of it's just too expensive to try and venture into.
Well, as I said, those are questions we've asked everybody, and I'm glad that you've thought through that process, because frankly, I have no experience with that, but it's my job to ask questions. Yeah. And if it works in other areas, sometimes you might be able to do that also. Yeah. So that's all I'll suggest at this point.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the question, because it's a real eye-opener when you start looking at it, and it's good to have that information out here. Mm-hmm. So appreciate it.
Any other discussion on the facilities? All right, again, I think the next step will just be then a little more offline pencil sharpening that we got to do, and then we'll be looking for a special meeting that we'll probably have to call, depending on where that lands, to take a vote of approval that would be passed on, hopefully approval, to our respective bodies. So.
And I would just like to add that there is urgency to that based on what the city is trying to move forward with our bonding and the construction of this facility.
Whereas my hope would be to see a special meeting called before the end of this month. So it's 12th today. Does that fit within our, we'd be cool with our bond schedule there, Sean, stay on task there?
Yeah, we kind of talked about moving to September 1st for first reading.
Okay. 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 Great, thanks for the discussion, everyone, on that. We'll move on to 6 and our audit.
Okay, this is we're seeking approval for engagement for financial audit services for fiscal year ending December 31st, 2020. Each year, we need to obtain an updated engagement letter from our independent audit firm, which is currently Eide Bailey, LLP. This letter confirmed our previously approved 3-year agreement for audit services 2018 through 2020 calendar years, and by approval from Metro Management Council, affirms our agreement to have Eide Bailey complete our annual audit for the current calendar year. Once approved by Metro Management Council and signed by the mayor, this letter is required to be presented to the South Dakota Department of Legislative Audit for their review and to gain their approval for the audit services to begin. So therefore, we present this for Metro Management Council approval in August to ensure that we can confirm approvals to begin the audit in a timely manner. Audit work begins in December of the current calendar year.
I would make a motion to approve Ide Bailey as the auditor.
Second?
All right, motion by Commissioner Benninga on that. I'm going to give the second to Counselor Kiley there. Any other discussion we need to have on that one? All right, all those in favor of that motion say yes.
Yes?
Yes.
All right, that will pass, and we'll move on to roll call vote for that item. Okay, then we'll take a roll call vote on it. Commissioner Benninga,
Yes.
Commissioner Karski,
Yes.
Counselor Erickson,
Yes.
Counselor Kiley,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So that's 5-0. All right, then we'll move on to item 7, our financials for April to July.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask Business Manager Anna Raker to come up and walk you through the financial statements.
Good afternoon. Anna Raker, Business Manager for Metro Communications. You have your financial statements in front of you, and they're also up here on the screen. There are 3 documents that we generally present for our financial statements. The first is a balance sheet summary, and in the balance sheet summary, we compare the current year assets, liabilities, and capital as compared to prior year. So let's start there. First of all, I'll point out to you, and Scott addressed this earlier, that our cash is down. You can see our cash is down quite a bit from last year. This is as designed in our management of our cash reserves. Once we determined that we no longer needed to amass funds to purchase a phone system and the state was handling those costs, we changed our practice and started managing our cash reserve at a lower amount to be a more effective use of the contributions from both the city and the county and their respective shares. And so moving forward, you're going to see this type of a balance unless we have some major change in funds or costs that are going to flow through our budget proper. I'll also point out that our accounts receivable is quite a bit higher than last year. This is due in part to the significant increase to the Brandon PSAP fee, and that's reflective of the additional staff that you approved for January of 20. Their fee is calculated based on our income and expenses, and so it fluctuates based on those figures. Following that, and then the rest of that is just simply timing of some of our billings and accounts receivables, and there's no concerns there with those from my perspective. The due from state and due from county, we talked about this last time. As a government agency receiving 911 funds, remember our surcharges flow in basically 2 months behind. So you have a subscriber that pays their phone company in November. Those funds are remitted to the state of South Dakota by the phone company in December. We receive those funds in January. And so at year end, as part of our audit, we have to estimate what we think our receipts are going to be for November and December. And so what you see there with the $47 due from state, that just shows that I overestimated our revenues of state incentives by $47. And then the $3,500 as a negative amount due from county, that's the traditional surcharges, and I underestimated those by $3,500. And it's just reflective of how close I was to estimating those amounts at year end. And just as a reference, we receive around $26,000 a month in incentives, and we receive around $191,000 or $192,000 a month in traditional 911 surcharges. So those figure estimates were $52,000 due from state and around $381,000 due from county. So pretty close, actually. Dropping down to prepaid expenses, you'll see there's a bit of an increase there from 19. That just had to do with the timing of some quarterly payments in 2019 and the adjustment for prepaids. Really, everything is fairly similar other than that. And then I'll drop down to accounts payable. You can see our accounts payable are about 6,000 less than last year. And that's really due in part to just a change in our payment of some of our insurance premiums. We changed insurance providers for dental, vision, and life in 2020, and we now pay before the end of the month, whereas in the prior year, they took the funds in the month following. And then the balance of it is our Wellmark premiums right now are actually less than last year, and it has to do with the vacancies, and we really have some great rates right now, which helps us tremendously from a financial perspective. And at the very bottom, you can see that our current year retained earnings is a minus 400,000, and that's going to match what you're going to see on the next pages for our activity in our profit and loss year to date through July 31st. So any questions about the balance sheet? Okay. All right, so moving on to the next one. This will be a summary, and it's a comparison by major categories of the current year through July and the prior year through July. So you can compare our income and expenses from year to year, from January through July. So you can see that our 911 surcharges show about a 1.1% growth. And we talked about this at the last meeting, that's kind of where we're seeing our growth. And I know that this is frustrating, and we have some conversations about this, but I do track these numbers really closely, and I have since I was hired. What I'm seeing is statewide, the numbers are stagnant and dropping, but Metro's numbers are increasing. So that, just understand that our numbers, we're receiving a larger share of the lines. However, the incentive funds are a pot. We receive a share based on population, and our share is the same, just like every other entity within that pie. But because the statewide lines are dropping, you're seeing just a slight reduction in what we're getting for dollars, even though the percentage is the same, and that's because that pot of money is shrinking just a little. And so the net effect is that our increase year to date, which you're going to see on the next page, is 0.83. But our increase over last year is 1.1. So just kind of comparing the numbers two different ways, they're very similar. I don't know if you have any questions about that right now, or if you want me to move on and we can talk about it some more when we get to the budget comparison. City-county share reflects our increase. That is a 25% increase over last year. Last year there was a weird timing with the payments, but it is 25%, and it all worked out at year end. It was a weird cash flow thing. Services, you'll see a significant increase over last year. A lot of this is due to the increase to Brandon because our budget increased substantially in 2020 due to payroll, due to our budgeted payroll costs. I will remind you that at year end, we do a reconciliation with Brandon, and that reconciliation adjusts any estimated fees based on our actual revenues and expenditures. So if our revenues go up, if our expenditures go down, or if the opposite happens, there's a reconciliation to them, a true up. And that's how that agreement was set up. I told you last time that we received a grant, and you can see that grant money came in for wellness, so that was a nice thing. And our other revenue is down. It's down 5,000, as you can see. A significant amount of this is interest. Interest rates are fairly flat right now, and we all know that. But also included in the year-to-date revenue is some recoveries. Remember, Scott talked to you about that recovery we were going to receive from the State 911 Coordination Board that was split equally among all the PSAPs. So that revenue is in there, so actually our interest is down even more, and you'll see that detail on the next page. Personnel. So our personnel is actually $305,000 more than last year, and that's logical. Last year at this time, we were without a director. Scott was here, but he was in a temp status. We had several vacancies, and we do have vacancies like Scott mentioned earlier, but we also staffed up, so we have more staff on board, and Scott is here full-time. So it just stands to reason that we would be in this particular situation right now. It's a logical amount. Dropping down to operating expenses. When you look at professional services, we talked about this last time. We had some increased recruitment costs. There are some things we purchase every couple years, and it just so happened we had to purchase them this year. And so that is in there. The other thing is we've had a fairly significant increase or an uptick in telephone interpretation costs. And that's something we just have no control over. We do our best to estimate what those costs are, but our costs have been significantly more than they were last year and in the last couple years. And that's something we'll continue to monitor. The rentals is just largely due to timing of payments. Repairs is a decrease. And that has to just do, again, with some timing of payments, and some of our costs are billed at different times of the year. Supplies are also down, and that's largely due to having purchased we replaced some one-time kind of things. In 2019, we replaced our copier and a fax module. And then we purchased our Microsoft Office for all of our computers. And so that's not something we do every year. And so that explains why we're a little less this year than last year. Travel and training is down. COVID has really affected our ability to do a lot of our travel and training. We've done our best to take advantage of local training. Like Scott mentioned earlier, we have some staff who've invested in some local opportunities, but there are some conferences and things that we normally would participate in that we just were not able to this year, and it's reflected there. Utilities, significant drop here. If you recall, Scott has visited with you in the past, and I talked about it last time too, that the CAMA lines, the 911 trunk lines, that cost us over $9,000 a month. The state was going to be taking them over. And for those of you who've been on the board for many years, you've recalled that they were going to take them over. They weren't, they weren't, you know, it's kind of been a back and forth. Well, it finally happened. And so that cost is only going to be about $10,500 versus we had budgeted for the first 7 months, $66,500. At the end of the year, it's going to save us $100,000 over our budget. There was just no way we knew that was going to happen. We kept waiting for it, and it finally happened. So that's a very good thing for all of us. So that's your current to prior year summary. Any questions with that? All right. So the last page is your current year-to-date versus budget, so current budget versus actual. On this document, you'll see we show you the year-to-date, which would be January through July. We show the budget year-to-date. We do our best to break that budget down for appropriate amounts for the 7 months. And you can see the variance there. And then we show you the annual budget and the percentage of the annual, so you can look at both comparisons. So when you look at our 911 surcharges, we budgeted a larger increase than what we're seeing. We're seeing around a 1% increase year to date. But we budgeted based on a 1.5% increase. And remember, we budget, because of our early budget approval, we budget basically 2 years ahead of time. And so when we budgeted 20, we were using 18 data in 2019 to budget 20. So it's pretty difficult to forecast 2 years ahead. But at that point, we were seeing a larger growth. We weren't seeing this kind of stagnant at the state level. So I am estimating right now we're going to be under budget around 38,000, maybe 40,000 at year end. City and county share is, that's on. You guys pay us monthly. You'll see what we budgeted for the PSAP services, and that is for 3 quarters. Audio recordings. You can see audio recordings are up. Something we just have no control over. We never know what attorneys' needs are going to be, but the request for audios has increased this year, as you can see. On the other hand, EMS transfer fees are down. If you look at the activity for March and April, they were rough months. There weren't as many transfers. They've come back up again, so we'll see where we're at year end. I think it just kind of depends on how activity in the community goes. And then you can see the interest earnings and how much we've lost over what our interest rate was a year ago. And of course, the recoveries is way up because of that, that amount that we received from the 911 Coordination Board, and that was over $7,000. Moving on to personnel. You'll see that our personnel is, for salaries, is below budget, and that's because we have some vacancies. And those vacancies are being covered often by overtime or temp staff. And as Scott has explained to you before, we've worked really hard to hold down on overtime by utilizing as much temp staff as we can. And as you can see there, we've gone over budget in temp staff, but the amount over budget is less than in overtime, and so it's a good use of our dollars, and that's attributable to our operational staff and how they manage those hours and the individuals available to work for us. We'll also see savings in retirement because of that, and group health insurance also. And so right now, I'm forecasting that we'll have a significant savings in payroll and benefits by year end. Dropping down to operating. Again, we talked about recruitment. There's a reason that's over budget. We've had 2 bouts of recruitment this year, and that happens every so often, and then we purchase supplies for that process. Rental, that is a little over budget, but that is truly just reflective of timing of payments. Maintenance contracts. The maintenance contracts are under budget. Part of it is due to the timing of our CAD maintenance. The city was kind enough to advise that they will be billing us late in the year, where we had budgeted for that monthly, and so you will see that catch up with us by year end, but that was nice of them for cash flow. Small equipment purchases, we're under budget, and really that's just due to lack of miscellaneous items. We always budget for monitors and different things like that that can go in the center, and we haven't had to purchase any of those items this year. We are over in computer hardware, and that has to do with some equipment we purchased for safety and security with the internet and the use of the CAD machines. And then also the software, even though it looks like we're way under in software in the line above, we will actually spend that. We're waiting on an upgrade to our scheduling software, and so by year end that will catch up. We've talked about training already. COVID has really affected our ability to do the type of training we normally have done. And then dispatch communications, you can see we're at $55,294, and the budget year to date would have been $114,000. And again, by year end, I think we're going to save $100,000 in that line item alone. The last thing I'll point out to you is the capital outlay, and Scott reported this to you at the last meeting that he had arranged to replace a logger, our recorder, a nice recorder for our 911 center. And we had budgeted $13,500, but that was for a calling tree. If you remember when Jessica did her budget presentation for 20, we were looking at purchasing a calling tree for within the center, and with the new phone system that wasn't needed, and so we were able to use those funds And once we knew the savings were going to be coming forward with the camel lines taken over by the state, we knew we had the money to replace that logger, which was an important purchase. Questions?
Any questions for Anna on this? All right. I don't see any. We'll just need a motion to accept the financials as
So moved.
presented there.
Second?
All right. Do I need a roll call vote on all these? I do. With telephonically, that's kind of a deal. Got it. All right, then we'll roll call vote to accept the financials. We got a motion and a second. Commissioner Benninga,
Aye.
Commissioner Karski,
Aye.
Counselor Kiley,
Yes?
Counselor Erickson,
Yes.
and I am an aye. That is
Yes.
5-0. You only get a vote once. Counselor Erickson, sorry.
Sorry, I like to vote twice sometimes.
All right, I need a motion, I think, to be able to move into exec session. Or do I need a motion to move into exec session? I do.
Yeah. I move to move into executive session for the purposes of and as authorized by South Dakota Codified Law 1-25-2, 1 and 4.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. We'll roll call that baby too. Commissioner Benninga,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiley,
Aye.
Counselor Kiley, whatever. You guys, I'm going to start calling you guys by your first names. It's so much easier. Commissioner Karski,
Aye.
Counselor Erickson.
Yes.
I'm a yes too. 5-0. We'll go into exec session. Thank you, everybody.
There are just a couple